I did it. Yeah. Okay. So, hello. We're doing a level within the horror genre for the Asbury game design project. Our aim is to show the negative experience of queer people and how it can be portrayed for the horror genre. What we're trying to do, our aim, is within the context of the game, Asbury is travelling between game worlds which are based on genres, helping them progress and evolve into a more suitable version of themselves to the current social climate. We're expanding on this concept by teaching players that they can't fix everything, and that some things need to evolve naturally over time. However, the player can still learn and be made aware of problems and issues within the genre. The issues we're raising is the queer coding of people as antagonists within the horror genre throughout cinematic history. We are displaying the harm that can come from negativity towards queer people through the use of genre and in a way flipping it on its head. So our aim is to submerge the player in the queer experience, and the way we're going to do this is we're going to be using game mechanics and environmental atmosphere to try and portray a more hostile environment that is more akin to how a lot of the queer experience can be perceived through the eyes of a queer person. How we're doing it? Oh, sorry, I missed a thing. We'll be changing the mechanics to limit the amount of control the player has, as removing their ability, such as removing their ability to run, jump, and fight with weapons or items. By doing this, we're simulating an experience that many people may go through in their lives. We're also presenting the character with a change of pace compared to the rest of the game in regard to mechanics and challenges, as we believe that the rest of the game is probably going to be somewhat fast-paced or more of an action title. Moving forward. So how we're doing it, we're going to be looking at the scope of what we're doing for this project. Our level is comprised of 5 key sections that seamlessly interlock into one narrative experience, taking the player through a queer character's life story. Each section will represent a significant point in the character's life relative to universal experience within the queer negativity. So while we're splitting the level into 5 pieces, each depicting an event with a unique item and atmosphere, we decided to break down these levels, or not levels, this one level and areas in the level into different things that we need to actually be looking at and be focusing on and prioritizing through our design. So that's layouts and maps, sound design, lighting design, environmental assets, 5 key items, 2 NPCs, level compilation, and script, which is just the 8 things that we think are more the things we need to focus in on as what we're changing within mechanics and how we're making the world feel, I guess. So when we're going to do it, we have made a somewhat comprehensive schedule to try and get across how we're going to be going throughout our project. So we've taken it into week-by-week segments and breaking it down into different tasks and in different areas. So we have level conception and initiation. I think I was meant to say ideation. We have level conception and ideation, which basically breaks down our concept art area, our planning, our whole look at how we're going to be actually making the game before we start making the game. So we're looking at environmental design, level layouts, initial asset design, light and sound planning, NPC design, thorough story planning, and key item design. We've then taken each one of these tasks and broken it down into, are we going to be doing it as a team, as a joint task, or are we going to be doing it as an individual task? And of course we have the date we're starting it, the date we're going to try and finish it by, how long it's going to take, and what percentage of it is done so far. So you can see we had to split things into 3 days or a week, because 3 days will be in the building doing work, or into a week, which is we'll be able to do work on this at home. A lot of the work we have to do here though, because we don't have either the programs or machines that can handle what we're doing. So, from the schedule, we'll be going through the roles, and because we are working because we're working as a group of 2 rather than a group of 3, 4, 5, and individually creating our own NPCs to our own strengths, we've decided that we are going to break down our roles into sets of 2 that will be worked on simultaneously at the same time, so with the same sort of theming. So pairing tasks that need doing and treating them as one stage in development, each of us will work on one of the 2 tasks. There are certain areas where we're going to be needing to work together on a single task, but for now we've broken them down into roles, or pairs of roles, mostly concerned with the Unreal Engine portion of this project, as design and modelling will be more of a whole team effort. So we've broken them down into layer artist and blocking, asset design, lighting implementation and sound creation, sound design and lighting design, key trigger placement and asset implementation, and for some reason one of them hasn't showed up, but there was also a environmental concept art and a key idea concept art, but I don't think it's updated onto there. Annoyingly. Back into what inspires. That's
You.
That's me. Okay. When are you going to talk? Okay. Okay. Well, what inspired us? I looked more at the symbology of Silent Hill 2 than anything else. I need to switch notes. So I've looked mostly at Silent Hill 2 and the way that it's been designed to be a symbolic representation of the character that you play as in Silent Hill 2, being, I think his name is James. It's James. Yes. If you look at Silent Hill 2, you can see that the actual creatures and world that you play in, being Silent Hill, is based on the psyche and the emotional state of your main character, James. Sorry for any spoilers, and anyone who doesn't hear about Silent Hill 2. In the game, you play as James, I think his name's Hayfield, I don't remember. He plays James, and he has just gone through an event where his wife was very ill and very sick, and he's had nurses around the house. And he has, somewhat stupidly, decided to kill his own wife because he couldn't part with any of the more emotional trauma that he's been through. And in the game, probably the most iconic character that you see in the game is Pyramid Head. And being Pyramid Head, the way he's designed and the way that he is actually portrayed in the game, he's meant to be the representation of James's emotional state and the guilt that's constantly following him from killing his wife, Mary. It's a manifestation of his need to be punished for his crimes, since James has not come to terms with his role in Mary's death, and Pyramid Head is symbolically meant to be himself holding a giant meat cleaver, seeing how he killed his wife with a meat cleaver, holding this giant meat cleaver, killing most of the female characters he comes across due to this guilt that he has. In the game there's also the iconic nurses, which are bandaged and patched, but are somewhat sexualized by the character because it's meant to represent the nurses that were around the house in the time of Mary's death, and how that it was something that he longed for but couldn't have due to his wife still being around, which then led to him killing his wife. Moving into the character of Maria, is meant to be a ghostly representation of Mary, of his late wife, and it's the promiscuous nature and more sexual nature of Mary, which he could never have, and this is shown later on from the game through Pyramid Head killing Maria over and over and over again, being the sign that James killed his own wife, and it's that same recurring guilt throughout the game. I'll move into a more abstract look at symbology once we look at the visuals we're going to be taking, looking at the abstract daddy character and the character of Mary herself in the game. For now, that's how I've looked at my influences of Silent Hill 2. I'm taking more of a symbolic approach to our influences, and we will need to look at our more visual influences.
Well, yes. So I looked at things. So I looked at it from a more sort of technical perspective, more mechanical perspective. So when the project was first given to us, my brain instantly went to Dragon Quest XI. I love that game. But from every town and city having a unique theme to the side quests and mini games, I figured this would be where I derived most of my inspiration. Despite most, if not all, of my initial ideas being brighter than was found in a typical horror game, I'm still able to draw snippets of inspiration from the Dragon Quest series. So Dragon Quest VIII in 2004 was the first 3D installment for the series, and from looking at screenshots from the game, I can see where you can implement a unique character design despite limitations in polycount or graphics. Even limited and short animations that still feature in the latest release that play while characters giving dialogue can add a lot of characterization, even if it's just minimal. Many assets of these games have not been changed since the first few games, and it's this idea of if it's not broken, don't fix it, and some of these things are like 30 years old. Some of the original game mechanics, and even designs from nearly 30 years ago, are still the same in the latest rendition of the series. Following this mindset, I figured it best to look at older horror games to draw my inspiration from, which is where I started looking at Silent Hill. So, from what I could find on the original Silent Hill games, without actually playing them myself, they were pretty scary. Compared to other horror games of the time, such as Resident Evil, Silent Hill focused in on the atmosphere and making you feel scared rather than overwhelming you with monsters and zombies for you to shoot down. Silent Hill restricts the player's vision heavily with thick fog. While at the time of the game's creation this helped to hide the poor render distance capability of the consoles, this helped to isolate the player and give this feeling of claustrophobia. This setting is not much different when moving around the dungeon-esque buildings, which simply replace the fog with limited vision and darkness. The player is trapped and has mainly sound to help blindly guide them around, which is another key aspect to the Silent Hill games, its sound design. While the general ambience of the game is unsettling, the player has a radio that makes them aware of when a monster is near. The closer you are to a monster, the radio emits louder, harsher, and really unnatural sounding static. Couple this with the noises the monsters actually make, and you can end up with some pretty good jump scares. The game also knows exactly when not to make noise. In Silent Hill 2, the player, coupled with a following NPC, go through areas of corridors and stairwells in mostly silence. The loudest sounds are their distinct footsteps. The game lulls you into a false sense of security and comfort until you get a single sound indicator before you're led into a chase scene with Pyramid Head. Giving such a distinct and recognizable sound or indicator to a specific enemy that's proven they're a threat is a great way to scare your players or put them in a position of fear. And then I looked at Outlast. Now the Outlast games, namely the first game and its follow-up DLC, The Whistleblower, feature exactly what we need to follow in terms of our map and layout. The game takes place in a psychiatric hospital where inmates known as variants have escaped and are butchering patients and staff alike. Other than the backstory, the way this game is laid out is reflective of what we need. Although the game is set in one building, the game itself and the path it leads you on as a player is set into some very distinct sections. While there are no bosses per se within Outlast, there are distinct variants that you meet whom you either escape from or cause them to die in some gruesome format. They tend to signify the start or end of sections and what send you through new areas of the game, these being different floors of the hospital, the sewers, and the laboratory, and so on. While a game is not in a building, I'd hope to replicate this format while sending a player on essentially a predetermined path, allowing for some minimal exploration. The player will be going through some distinct areas. It won't just be a single item in each area that makes them distinct, but also the atmosphere and how the enemy, our monster, acts towards the player. There we go.
Cool. Thank you. Moving into what mechanics we'll actually use and how we're going to implement them from those influences. We've decided that we will break down the mechanics into three key sections, being a low priority section, medium priority section, and a high priority section. The low priority being things that we could implement if we had time and skill to do so. So these are things like we've decided to put item interaction, a hide mechanic, and dialogue boxes into this section because we don't think that these mechanics are actually going to be that important to having a fully functioning game, but they are nice little flares on top of it that could be very helpful. We have medium priority, which is things like NPC interaction, time limit, lighting sound triggers, path blocking environment, and limited character movement, which are things that we probably should have, and that could make the game a lot more fun, but we're able to take out one or two of these things if we need extra time or extra resources to work on something else, with like in the high priority section, where we have item collection, AI/NPC pathing, state/environment triggers, and a win fail condition. These are things that we absolutely need to have and that we need to be prioritizing as much as we can, because these are things that are going to make or break the game. And look, going into how it's going to look. We've looked at environment and we've looked at creature design as our two main influences for how the game is actually going to be received. Pulling from our chosen games, we've decided to look at our level having a dark atmosphere, an impeding feeling of being completely alone, yet always being watched by something just out of sight. Our visual style will draw heavily from our influences, also tries to distinguish itself for its use of distortion and unique atmospheric detail, prevalent to the experience of raw negative emotion. As queer individuals ourselves, we understand that our experiences are not universal, but everyone is different, and therefore everyone will have a fear that they fear much more intensely through the lens of their own perception. Because of this, we later reached out to the wider community, but I'll hand off to Neve to look at the visual environmental influences.
So, pretty straightforward. We want the game to start off in a sort of autumnal themed sort of area, sort of a clearing where you come in and find this NPC who will sort of send you on throughout the game. Drawing direct inspiration from the Silent Hill games, we want to feature fog in there, limiting the player's vision, sort of making them feel trapped. Obviously, once the game starts to get a bit darker, you still need to have you still need to have some sort of coloration in there. And purple is very sort of a natural colour. You don't find that in nature, or tend to, and we think that will work quite well. Also, Silent Hill has sort of this purple hue at times, and so there's Sunny's inspirations was Colour Up Space. So we sort of want to feature, this sort of forest setting, and then taking direct inspiration from different maps. So we've got some Dragon Quest maps there, and the Silent Hill map itself, and just sort of combining all of that together to sort of inspire us really directly inspire the game as a whole. There we go.
Yeah, cool. That's our environmental visual design. Moving into our more creature monster-esque design, I've looked at favourite artists, you've seen him before, Beck Skinsey. He's got very monstrous, human-esque characters in his artwork, but they're very warped and disfigured, which gives a very good sense of unfamiliarity and uncanniness. I then looked at another artist called Trevor Henderson, who designs creatures and monsters such as, this is called The Angel, this is called Big Charlie, which is quite a funny name, and that's called Long Horse, quite akin to what he is, he's a long horse. And these are meant to be monsters which represent emotions and emotional states, which is how he designs them. So Long Horse is meant to represent the feeling of being seen from the darkness, or being watched, but having some sort of strange, I think it's meant to represent a feel of comfortableness with where you are and what's going on in your own fears. Big Charlie is meant to represent the fear of being made obsolete, I think is his whole thing, is being made obsolete because he has this character called the Lamb behind him, which is basically a greater version of him. And it's meant to feel, the artwork behind Big Charlie is meant to be made obsolete or made into something that you're not meant to be, is the idea of him. Going to the Angel is the fear of other human beings or things that are human-esque. It's things that should look right but aren't quite right. And again, that goes into that whole detail of uncanniness. I then looked at more of your classic H.P. Lovecraft-esque monsters, such as the Moon Monster, which is just a creature in the moon. The character of Hasta from H.P. Lovecraft, which of course is the Yellow King, which is the embodiment of all insanity of humanity. And going into some more monstrous designs, I looked at Dead Space for their own design influences, and going back to Silent Hill 2, I looked at the character of the Abstract Daddy, which is the embodiment of the character Maria's childhood trauma with sexual abuse by her own father. If you look at the actual design of the Abstract Daddy, it is a humanoid character bending over what appears to be a bed frame with some sort of very phallic-looking object coming out of its body. And in the room that you actually find this character and have to have this mini boss fight, it's almost designed to look like a scarred flesh, and the room itself has lots of holes along the walls with phallic-looking imagery coming in and out of these holes, and it's meant to represent the trauma that this character has actually been going through and has been through her entire life. And but because of our influences of trauma and of negative experiences and negative emotions, we actually and our goal to make this this game, based on the negative queer experience, we've reached out to the queer community with a survey slash questionnaire on their experiences and how we're going to be using those to influence our work. And beneath again, demographics.
So pretty straightforward. I'm going to just be giving you some straight up facts. So our demographics, so the most common ages were 15 to 18 and 19 to 21, making a large age demographic young people and young adults. And surprisingly, we had a few responses from older people. We had 2 responses from people who stated to be 41 plus, which I'm very surprised by. And then the overwhelming majority of people who responded identified themselves within the LGBT community. We also asked if you're an ally. We had a couple of people say no, which is questionable, but pretty straightforward. That was who we got. So the majority of those who filled out the survey identify as female. However, we also had a solid amount of responses from those who identify as male or within the non-binary umbrella. So, it wasn't just straightforward male, female. We actually got some solid representation of people who identify within the LGBT community other than their sexuality. So the overwhelming majority of responses agreed that they had a negative experience due to how they identify, but to sum it all up, the largest demographic of our responses are young females who identify themselves as LGBT.
And those are that is the audience we're aiming to actually get people to.
That is yeah. So to sort of summarize the negative, so we actually asked directly, can you give us an example of what negative experience you've had due to identifying as LGBT? And we got quite a few responses, people actually giving their responses. So multiple responses stated being harassed in public, ranging from verbal harassment and slurs to stalking and physical assault. We had multiple responses stating they had faced erasure for being asexual or being called greedy for being bisexual. Multiple responses stating having come out to friends and family only to be met with queerphobia, harassment, erasure, or being outed against their will. And we had multiple responses of being removed from sports teams, denied or removed from work and jobs, or change in attitude from community after coming out or being outed. So, and then we asked them, how did this change your viewpoint? How did these experiences change your viewpoint on life, essentially? And we have multiple responses stating that they're now hesitant to open up to people and that they hide their identity depending on the situation. We have multiple responses stating that despite the way they were raised, they're now a more accepting and supportive person. And we have multiple responses stating that negativity and erasure have made them further question their own identity and wonder if they're lying to themselves. There we go.
So, what we can take from this is that most of our responses said that queerphobia, homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, etc. Is when someone just doesn't like you for being different and not sticking to their ideals of the social norm when it comes to who you love and what you can identify as. The experiences we got were hard to read through and clearly outline just how much queerphobia is still around in the world. From the experiences, we can pull a good insight into the negativity towards queer people, and the large majority of experiences were either verbally abusive or socially excluding. We can use atmosphere and environment to portray these feelings of being alone but berated on all sides by people around you that I believe are outlined within these experiences. Next. So, to put it simply, these experiences are hard for people, made people hard to be open, made it hard for people to be open. It also empowered freedom in some way, and a lot of the imagery we got from their experiences, how we asked how they would describe negative experiences. We got a lot of monstrous or non-humanoid but humanoid-esque imagery.
A lot of people stated that they described it as a large, oppressive, stifling,
yes,
or suffocating.
Yeah, so these negative experiences have made it harder for a lot of people to be open about who they are and made them less likely to be happy with who they are within themselves. Many of these people have been scared of openly being who they are because of the fear of how those around them will think of them. On the flip side, some of these responses we got of how their experiences has actually empowered and emboldened them to be an activist and not just care about as how much people think about them, but also take the power away from the experience and instead used it to help others. When asking how people would characterize hate towards queer people, the overwhelming response was that it was like a huge thing that's always watching you and judging you just out of you. It's a dark nothing, in quotations, that people don't mention, but they all know it's there, and because it could reach out to you and suffocate you at any moment. It's vaguely humanoid in shape, but not quite right, with an uncanny resemblance to something normal, but with an overwhelming power to make you feel like you're wrong just because you exist, pushing you back into a corner and tearing down all your defenses for no perceivable reason other than you simply existing. In a more self-identified way, queerphobia can be characterized as being made to feel like you have to lock away everything within yourself and throw away the key, putting it just out of reach, obscured by the fear of isolation. Unable to express yourself, all colour in the world dies and becomes, just like everything else, normal. A sense of loss of self, no individuality and self-loathing, and no way to fight back against these feelings. As the last question, we asked if people like the game. We asked if people think that a game like this would be appropriate. Those who said no gave us their reasons, and the key feedback was that it all depends on how it's portrayed. So you can see that 32% of our responses were a no, and 32% were a maybe, so that's 64% were a no or maybe, whether the game would make them uncomfortable. But we also got a lot of these varied responses, such as anything too close to my own experiences would be uncomfortable for me, or it's a subject that has to be very carefully constructed around because it's such a difficult subject for a lot of people. And then some people said that they would just straight up get uncomfortable with a game that would try to look into and embody the queer experience being in negativity. Of course, we asked if it was appropriate, and 64% of people said that yes, it was appropriate to have a horror game based around this experience, and then giving their reasons was that they feel that it's a experience that needs to be told, but it's very difficult to tell a queer negative experience about going into the whole straight people are bad, or I had this queer experience, so it's how everyone has a queer experience. It's a subject that has to be very carefully looked at, whereas 36% of people actually said that no, it wasn't appropriate to have a queer experience within a horror game, simply because they don't want people to look at it as the wrong way around. They didn't want people to see the game and think, oh, negativity is happening towards them because they're queer and that's bad. A lot of people are struggling with the idea of making a queer experience horror game because they had the belief that it would be something along the lines of the horror is being queer rather than the horror is what's coming from being queer.
Or some people felt that they didn't want to put other people through what they had been through. They felt it was such a bad experience, they wouldn't want others to experience it.
So yeah, the key feedback we got from all of this was that it depends on how it's portrayed. It depends on how it's portrayed, and we have to be very clear that this is a negativity towards queer people. That's the bad guy, not the queer person itself. In addition to this, it has to feel real enough to tap into people's own experiences, but not so real that it will cause upset due to people's past trauma or past experiences, and it'll be too close to their own negativity. The last question we asked was, would you like updates on this project if we were to put it public, to gauge interest? And out of 50 responses, 76% of people said that yes, they would like to be told about if this game was to get off the ground, and 24% said no. So that just gives you, but it's an overwhelming majority of people would like to see a game like this created and would like to see updates on it in the future. So a final takeaway from all of this is that it's a tricky subject to tackle. It has to be very carefully constructed and has to be very carefully put together, so we don't upset anyone within the queer community or within any other community, as we don't only aim to look at queer people and their negative experiences, we also aim to put those experiences forward and try to make people not within the queer community understand what's going on and how a lot of us can feel. We have to portray the feeling that you can't fix everything to the character Asri, because this is meant to be a game focused on fixing or finding solutions to why genres have to be more put forward towards the current climate. We have to make it very clear that sometimes things just can't be fixed, but they could be fixed in the future, and we have to try and get across what's wrong with the genre right now, so that in the future it can be fixed, but right now is not the right time, or it's not possible to be fixed right now because of the problems that are there, and because a lot of society still has a problem with the problems themselves.
Or just educating them.
Yeah, just educate people on the problems rather than trying to fix it, because some may not even see it as a problem. And we also know that we often, as people, me and Neve, aim way too high for our projects, and we end up with a bit of a mess at the end. So we know that our scope and our aims for this project are somewhat unrealistic, and that's why we tried as best we can to break it down into segments which are going to be allowing us to have contingency plans in place in case we can't get 5 areas done or 5 queen moments done. We're going to break it down to 3. If we can't get all the priorities done, we're going to have just the high and half the medium priorities done. If we can't have all the concept art or all this atmosphere done, we'll break it down into, okay, what can we get atmospheric done? We can get this lighting area and we can get this sound done. We're going to try and break it down into digestible segments that will allow us to actually get a final product which is playable and also some more portrays what we're trying to go across. I think that's it, unless you had any extra notes to add.
Any questions?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Just want to say, I think that was an excellent presentation. Especially liked, all of the feedback that you'd got. I think you've sort of hit nail on the head there, with how important it is to make sure you're in sort of constant communication with the community. And I think you've done a really good job in getting a well-rounded sort of view on how to approach your game. Just out of curiosity, where was it that you got most of your feedback from?
We put the survey on Reddit, on specifically LGBT Reddits. I also put it out on my Instagram, as I know most of the people. I've put out surveys before, and I know most of the people who respond to the surveys, and I know most of them are LGBT. So for this thing, we didn't want to just get responses from LGBT people. We wanted responses from people who may know people. So we wanted that know and ally answers there. So obviously.
Yeah, because I think when you said obviously that you want to educate people, that it's not the queer people that you need to educate, is it?
No.
It's the sort of the queer-phobic people that you need to educate, and they are the ones that you need to target, really, aren't they? So, though I think you've got a really good perspective on the LGBTQIA community, I think it would be also quite a difficult subject, but quite a sort of enlightening one if you could try and find some of those sort of queer-phobic communities and find out, really dig down to the reasoning behind that, and that will give you a more of a well-rounded sort of view on how you could actually educate those people.
Being really careful with that.
Yeah, obviously.
Obviously, find those people and get them to respond to us.
It might be more of a case of
less rude.
Research and observation.
Than actually reaching out to them.
We had a lot of responses stating that it was sort of obvious that we had quite a few responses from people in America, because we had a lot of people stating that they came from a religious background.
As well as the way the colloquialisms they use when writing out their statements with things like, instead of saying charity shop, they said thrift store, which is their way of saying charity shop.
So we could tell, so this is the thing, and obviously there isn't, I wouldn't say religion is quite as big a thing over here anymore, at least. So it's the thing, I know there are some people we could approach, but obviously, like John said, for our own safety, maybe.
Just observe.
Well,
observe.
Absolutely, I think John's completely right. Maybe don't reach out to those communities, but maybe you could make that sort of try and formulate quite an extensive outside observation into what maybe these communities think.
There's quite a few documentaries that I've already seen. There's a really good one with Stephen Fry, where he does go ahead and he literally confronts.
That's some Louis Theroux ones as well.
Louis
They're
Theroux's
probably
really
a good place to start as well. But John, what do you think?
I think concept-wise, you guys have grounded really well in research. You guys have a strong idea of what sort of level you're going to make. In terms of the actual what it is, the presentation's slightly lacking. So we're not seeing any concept art or maps and even what the actual game, how it's or this level's going to play out, has to be sort of pieced together from your prioritized list of mechanics and such. So that's the bit that worries me. You got a great concept, but in terms of the actual planning, in terms of what is it going to be, is a bit thin on the ground at the moment. So I'd urge, as soon as possible, start jamming out that concept art, some basic level designs, and start doing the block meshing process as well. Chucking in some of those blueprints for your high priority game mechanics, and just getting something that works. And even if it's the most simplistic one room kind of thing, once you get that working, then you can start, oh, let's add in a corridor here, or let's expand this area out, and things like that. And I think that would be, once you get that down, it'll become a lot clearer about what it's actually going to be based on that concept.
So we need to work on our visualization then.
Yeah, and experimentation,
how
and
yeah.
get something out there as soon as possible, because
Okay.
at the moment, in terms of me and Elliot being the sort of game producers, greenlighting it, concept's really strong, but a lot of questions still be asked about,
Yeah.
is it achievable, what is it, kind of things.
Yeah, yeah,
That's fine.
Yeah, from my research into game pitches, visualizing your project is the most important thing, because if they have something to look at, they're going to be more interested than if you just have an idea.
So I think really before we can properly green light it, we would need to see a good sort of production folder, almost of yeah, like John was saying, concept art and things. So yeah, in the short term, that's definitely what you should be working on. You guys got any questions?
I know you both have very different views on what genres you like. So Neve specifically, what sort of majorly pushed you to join within that horror genre?
So this is where we had a first team meeting. So what we did is when the brief was launched, we spent like a day literally just coming up with our own individual ideas. I knew that Sunny was going to go for horror because that's just what he's always done. I was a bit more mixed on things, but I knew sort of from the get-go I wanted to do something I wanted to feature that autumnal feel, because I feel like that was just sort of what was in my brain. And we had this meeting, and I knew we'd have to come to some kind of compromise. And I was very hesitant to jump on the horror theme, but we sat there and we just sort of through discussing, I knew that we'd hit something and that would sort of click with both of us, and that did happen. I feel like we maybe could have put something in there to do with that initial meeting. But yeah, the idea we came up with, it did, he's going to be focusing on the horror aspect of things. This is where we're split in that he's going to be focusing on that. I'm not, when we're testing, we'll know we're doing well because I will get scared. That's where I don't do well with horror games myself, which is ironic because I'm making a horror game. So we just sort of worked, and it just I thought this is a good idea.
I think we hit a good compromise where you wanted more autumnal, sort of lighter theme, and I wanted a more dark, more symbolic theme, and we hit that good middle ground of, okay, what we're both interested in, we want to try and portray the queer community, okay, we can do it in a dark forest, that'll work, that'll be a good compromise for both of us. And we eventually came around to that idea of having start off more of a pretty autumnal scene and ending in a more horrific autumnal scene, which gives us a good middle ground for us to work on. I think it was
organically. It was very organic.
Once we hit the idea of portraying the queer negativity, that was, and like I said, the interest we both want to try and portray, and I think we hit a good middle ground there.
That sounds like a good approach, because it's important to remember, like you said, Sonny, it's a level within a wider game. And like you said, the general sort of audience that we're going for are the ones who be interested in perhaps a more thoughtful 3D platformer, but generally more action-based in the sense of maybe not so much combat, but exploring and interacting with things and things like that. So horror-themed level, but we don't want to alienate people who aren't into the horror genre. So if we can get Neve a bit scared, but not to the point where she doesn't want to play it anymore, I think that's a good sort of bellwether that you're on the right track.
Stress me out,
Yeah,
but I'll do it.
Yeah, that's what we want to try and do, is using mechanics and specifically taking away mechanics, taking away the freedom of movement, taking away jumping, taking away attacking, things like that. We want to also try and incorporate that into portraying the queer experience, because it's a lot of the time you do feel a bit suffocated and you do feel a bit like you don't have control over everything. That's what we're aiming to go for, and I think that using mechanics to get across our message as well as the whole theme of it all, I think that worked very well.
It's
It
got
would-
this important.
Yeah, I guess also, like John was saying about your sort of visual development work, it would be like tied into that stuff. You really need to like try and distill the message that you're trying to get across by the end of your level, and you will be able to use that as like a marker, won't you? But this sort of goes for, I know we're not in your presentation anymore, but this goes for both teams. But you're all going to need to spend a bit of time over half term jamming out some of those visual documents, sketches, concept art, renders, lighting things. You know, you need to really work on getting a lot of that stuff together, because they're going to be acting as markers for all of you guys, because you're working collaboratively and you want to be able to get your message across correctly and accurately. So please, like over half term, make a real sort of good conscious effort on getting as much visual sketch work as possible.
Stay in contact with the other team members. So I'm opening up this room on Tuesday and Wednesday, 9 to 4:30. If anyone can get in at that time, I think that's an excellent time to come in and just block mesh out a really basic, using the 3D platformer template on Unreal. Just get something out there as your basis, and maybe see if you can work in some of the initial mechanics as that start point that you can then develop onwards.
Cool. Have you got any more questions, John?
Nope, I'm all good.
Dan,
all
any
good.
questions?
It was all like the feedback from like all the little sort of stories and experiences that you got back from people. I was just wondering if you're like going to try and blanket all of those kind of experiences into one, or are you going to focus on like a certain experience?
That's what we did. So
Yeah.
basically what we were looking for with those things was, what we were looking for is we're looking for this universal experience. We've been through negative stuff, but we didn't want to sit back and go, well, this must be what everyone goes through. So that was the point. So what we've done is we've generalized we've found what multiple responses stated. We've found a common ground amongst most of them. Some people literally said that they've never experienced anything negative. So that was the whole point. We've sort of generalized them as best we can to find that common ground.
Yeah, we don't want to. We're very aware that the experience of being a queer person is different for everyone, because it's not going to be the same for everyone. It's the same with any experience. But we don't want to just like make it so specific in one of those experiences that it alienates everyone else that hasn't gone through that experience. But we also don't want to make it so general that it feels like no one's gone through that experience. We want to try and hone in on those key facts which are common, like you said, commonplace throughout all of the different experiences we've looked at, but not make it so. It's going to be hard finding a middle ground for that. That's
You don't want it
gonna
to be too on the nose.
Yeah.
You don't want to be like, we don't want to take this one guy whoever they were, we don't want to take their experience of being kicked off their sports team and sort of throw that in the game and be like, look, you get kicked off a sport. Like, we don't want to be so on the nose like that. So yeah, we sort of were like, so when I went through it, I said multiple responses have stated harassment, multiple have stated stalking. Like, that's what we tried to do.
I'm going to throw an idea out there, but just it might be a nice little, as long as you get permission from these people, it might be a nice little sort of thing to integrate into your game as like whispers or something like that, and use that sort of that narrative that you've got from such a really good foundation from, and use that in your game. Obviously, I think you need to get sort of permission to do that from those people.
That's the issue, is that the survey was anonymous, so we don't actually know who responded to
Yeah.
it.
Okay.
But we could always put out another post onto the Reddit post we put out
On the same
saying,
level.
if you have responded, can you
Yeah.
please
Yeah.
let us know?
And my survey's still up on mine.
Or you
Yeah.
could just put out another one saying, what are some of the
Follow-up.
things
Yeah.
some of the negative things that have been said to you, if you don't mind, obviously
Yeah.
with a disclaimer out there, etc. But
That's the thing. Sound design is key to a horror game.
Yeah,
So
that
whispers,
has to be.
overly loud noises. We want obviously
It's building
with
the atmosphere.
building the atmosphere. We want to implement stuff with the sound design, which is
Mm.
which is a bit more than we could do. So
So because the actual mechanics and the idea behind it was sort of split out across presentation, I know you guys don't have a slide prepared for this, but would you be able to summarize your level concept? So we've got an idea of what it looks like, we've got an idea what the monster looks like. As a player, I'm sitting down, I've loaded this level, what happens?
So mechanics wise and what you actually do.
Yeah.
Okay.
So-
Yeah.
you go in, you talk to an NPC who
This
is
is in the
a
forest.
clearing,
Yes.
who is in a clearing in an autumnal forest. You go up to this NPC, this elderly NPC. We might have some short dialogue there depending on the time scale. And basically, they ask you to go and find an item that they've dropped. So there is a distinct clearing. It will lead you. So you'll go through. You'll find the item. You'll turn to go back to this NPC, and the path will be blocked off. You will then be forced, essentially, as a player, to go where it's taking you. It's going to be very linear, very direct, with minimal exploration, with some valves in there.
We will have some exploration where we can, but that's the idea of breaking up into 5 key parts. Is that you have this first key part, which is you meet the NPC, talk to them, they tell you, "I've dropped this thing. Can you go get it?" You go get it. You turn around to go get it to bring it back, and the way is blocked off. So then you have to continue further into this forest.
Because a new path is open when
Yeah.
you turn around again.
Yeah.
So you have to go down this route, and basically that is where the game is then going to delve, and it's going to, as you pick up more items, that's basically going to trigger the game to get darker. You're going to at some point come across the monster, the threat that's going to be following you, and the further in you go, the worse it's going to get, which is where we get into the win or fail aspect of the game, which is where you need to collect all of the items to win, but there's going to be multiple areas where you could fail, or the monster will catch you. It's basically going to be like a secret timer sort of thing.
So it's the further you go in, the closer the monster gets to you, or the more likely, or the more aggressive it gets, or we need to iron that out.
That each area is going to have a distinct atmosphere, or distinct something that will happen.
It's going to have a key moment in this character that you met at the beginning. It's supposed to be their life story told in reverse almost. So that's the end of their life, is where they've met you, and they've said, "Can you go get this thing?" And you'll be going for each of these, by that time, 4 segments, because it will be, first segment is meeting them. Each of these 4 segments and getting back to the final segment will be the start of their life, the start of their negative experience. It will get darker and more twisted in the story as you go along.
Background.
And then eventually, if you get through all of it, it will then loop back round, and maybe they'll be gone in the clearing, or maybe there'll be something left over for where they have been, or
It's annoying because we've got this so visualised in our heads, and
It's hard to explain.
we're on the same page. It shouldn't
That's
be hard
why
to
it's good
explain.
to get this stuff
Yeah.
down
It
on
shouldn't
the
be hard to
page.
explain, but it's annoying. We've discussed this so many times over and over, and obviously it sounds really complex. But we really...
in our heads it's really simple, but saying it out loud is very complex.
Yeah, definitely need to block mesh that ASAP, because you want to pinpoint where's the fun in the chat. I know it's the topic's not fun in itself and such, but as a game, that's what I mean by fun and stuff. Where's the challenge? You got the monster coming up behind you as a timer, basically. Are the items just sitting there on this sort of corridor style path, even if it winds and seems open world, but is actually a corridor? Are the items just there? Do they require some sort of platform mechanic to get to them? And then that sort of adds stress to the time limit, or?
I think
This is where the block meshing comes in, because we've discussed, do we have it as an open world sort of thing, or do we have it as like a maze? This is where the block meshing needs to come
as well as that, I
in.
think it'll be a bit more influences, because because we don't want to have a platforming aspect, we want to take away that ability from the
But
players.
you've got that time constraint, so
Yeah.
that's the constraint that you're using to trigger an emotional response. But what goes along with that constraint? There must be something some challenge that causes that time constraint to be relevant.
Okay.
Just my view on it. I feel like it's got like the makings of a puzzle sort of
That's what I was
feel
thinking.
to it. Where and like with the time limit, adding pressure to you know, to how you do the puzzles, or you know, and they can be quite. In my head, they're quite mechanical, like the puzzles, like you were talking about valves and things. You know, and I think that could be quite a good thing.
Could be having to like reorder these symbolic items, or
That's insane.
select the right one to get through a gateway or
Yeah.
a valve.
With that, we can look at games like Resident Evil, because they use a lot of puzzles.
There's a lot of puzzles
Yeah,
in Silent
like
Hill
just
as well.
Tomb Raider and things like that as well. You know, they quite a lot of Tomb Raider games. They like the puzzles are quite well thought out. So might
And they
be-
generally, rather than like being put into a little puzzle in a game, they're generally more of a world puzzle.
you explore it,
Yeah.
and yeah.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, we'll leave it there. Yeah, well done.